The Rhine was behind him now, swallowed by the fog and the sound of distant artillery that rolled like God clearing his throat. Captain Isaiah Blackwell stood at the edge of a muddy road that disappeared into German soil, watching the last of the 761st Tank Battalion's Shermans grind past, their tracks chewing the earth into chocolate-colored paste. Snow fell in lazy spirals, melting the moment it touched his shoulders, and the air tasted like wet wool and cordite. He was 32 years old, born in Birmingham, educated at Howard, commissioned at Fort Benning where the white officers had made him eat in a separate mess hall, and now he was the first black officer in the 12th Armored Division to cross into Nazi Germany. No one had said congratulations. No one had said anything at all. Behind him, Lieutenant Haferswhite from Connecticut, 23 and soft around the jawline, shifted his weight from boot to boot. "Sir, the colonel wants us to scout ahead to Kleinhausen, 2 miles northeast. Intelligence says it's mostly evacuated, but there might be stragglers. Civilians. Maybe a rear guard." Isaiah didn't turn around. He kept his eyes on the road on the way it curved past a stand of skeletal pines that looked like they'd been shelled into submission. "Just us? You, me, Corporal Davies, and Private First Class Monroe," the colonel said. Havers stopped, and Isaiah could hear the hesitation like a stone caught in the man's throat. He said it would be good for morale. You know, for the men to see. For the men to see a colored officer leading from the front, Isaiah thought. Or maybe for the men to see me get killed first. He'd stopped trying to parse the difference months ago. The 12th Armored had integrated its command structure under pressure from Washington. From Eleanor Roosevelt herself, some said, and Isaiah had been transferred from a quartermaster unit where he'd been rotting behind a desk, requisitioning boots and filing reports that no one read. Now he wore captain's bars and carried an M1. Garandon tried not to think about the fact that half the white soldiers under his nominal authority wouldn't salute him unless an officer with more melanin-free skin was watching. "Let's move," Isaiah said. They moved. The road into Germany was not a road so much as a suggestion of one, a memory of asphalt beneath 6 inches of mud and snow and the pulverized remains of a Wehrmacht supply truck that had been strafed by a thunderbolt sometime in the last 72 hours. Corporal Davies, a skinny white kid from Ohio who whistled through the gap in his front teeth, took point. Private First Class Monroe, a black soldier from Detroit with hands the size of dinner plates, brought up the rear. Havers stayed close to Isaiah, close enough that Isaiah could smell the coffee on his breath, the nervous sweat beneath his wool coat. The trees on either side of them were stripped bare, their branches like broken fingers reaching toward a sky the color of old dishwater. Occasionally they passed a burned-out farmhouse, its timbers still smoking, and once they saw a dead horse lying in a ditch with its legs frozen in the air as if it had been trying to gallop into the afterlife. No one spoke. The only sounds were their boots in the slush, the creak of leather, the metallic click of Monroe checking his rifle for the 4th time in 10 minutes. Isaiah's mind wandered despite himself. He thought about his mother, who had cried when he'd enlisted, who had begged him not to go fight for a country that wouldn't let him vote in half its states. He thought about the German propaganda leaflets he'd seen scattered across France, the ones with cartoons of black soldiers depicted as apes, as savages, as subhuman monsters come to rape and pillage the pure Aryan homeland. He thought about the white lieutenant colonel in Metz who had looked him in the eye and said, "Captain, I don't care what color you are as long as you can do your job," and then had immediately assigned him to the most dangerous patrols, the ones where the life expectancy was measured in days. He thought about what it meant to be first. Kleinhausen appeared through the snow like a ghost materializing. It was a small town, maybe 200 buildings clustered around a church with a steeple that had been sheared off by shell fire. Most of the windows were shattered. Doors hung open on broken hinges. The cobblestone streets were littered with debris, overturned carts, scattered belongings, a child's doll with its head missing. The smell of smoke was everywhere, thick and acrid, mixing with the sweeter stench of something dead and decaying beneath the snow. "Looks empty," Havers whispered. "Looks like a trap," Monroe muttered. Isaiah raised his fist. They stopped. He listened. Wind through the broken windows. The distant thump of artillery maybe 5 miles west. A dog barking somewhere, high-pitched and frantic. Nothing else. He signaled them forward, and they moved into the town in a loose line, rifles up, eyes scanning the empty doorways and shattered storefronts. They were halfway to the church when Isaiah saw the white flag. It was hanging from a second-story window of what had once been a bakery, a bedsheet tied to a broomstick, fluttering weakly in the wind. Isaiah felt his stomach tighten. He glanced at Havers, who had gone pale. "Could be a trick," Havers said. "Could be surrender," Isaiah replied. They approached the building slowly, Davies and Monroe covering the flanks while Isaiah and Havers moved to the front door. It was ajar. Isaiah kicked it open with his boot and stepped inside, his rifle leading the way. The interior was dark and cold and smelled like yeast and ash. Shelves that had once held bread were empty. The counter was scorched. Flour had been spilled across the floor in white drifts that looked like snow. "Nicht schiegen," a voice called from upstairs. "Don't shoot, we're Ergebon uns. We surrender." Isaiah exchanged a glance with Havers, then called up the stairs in his careful textbook German. "Come down slowly. Hands where I can see them." There was a long pause, and then footsteps, slow, hesitant. A man appeared at the top of the stairs, maybe 60 years old, bald, wearing a stained undershirt and trousers held up with rope. His hands were raised. His face was gray with fear. Behind him came a woman, younger, maybe 40, her hair tied back in a scarf, her eyes red from crying. And behind her, 3 more, 2 teenage boys and an elderly woman who could barely walk, leaning on a cane. They descended the stairs like people walking to the gallows. When the old man reached the bottom, he stopped. His eyes found Isaiah's face, and something changed in his expression. Not fear exactly, but something deeper. Recognition of wrongness. Cognitive dissonance. His mouth opened slightly. "You are American?" the old man said in halting English. "That's right. But you are... ... single quotes," he trailed off. His eyes flicked to Isaiah's uniform, to the captain's bars on his collar, back to his face. "You are an officer?" Isaiah felt the familiar tightness in his chest, the weight of 1,000 humiliations compressed into a single moment. "I'm Captain Blackwell, 12th Armored Division, United States Army." "You're surrendering to me?" The old man's face did something complicated. He looked at the woman behind him, then at the boys, then back at Isaiah. "They told us," he said slowly, carefully, "that the Schwartz, the black soldiers, were criminals, animals, that they would kill us all. They lied," Isaiah said flatly. "Yes," the old man said. "Yes, I see that now," but his voice was shaking, and Isaiah could see that he didn't entirely believe his own words, that decades of propaganda and prejudice were warring with the evidence of his senses. Havers stepped forward. "Are there any German soldiers in this town? Wehrmacht?" "Sisses." The old man shook his head. "They left 2 days ago, retreating east. They took everything. Food, horses, young men. They said the Americans would burn the town, that we should flee. But we have nowhere to go." Isaiah lowered his rifle slightly. "We're not here to burn anything. We're here to secure the area. Are there any other civilians hiding?" "In the church," the woman said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Maybe 40 people. Old people. Children. The priest." "Show us," Isaiah said. They walked through the town in a strange procession. Isaiah and his 3 soldiers, the German civilians trailing behind like prisoners or supplicants, it was hard to say which. The snow was falling harder now, coating the rubble in white, softening the jagged edges of destruction. When they reached the church, the old man called out in German, and after a moment the heavy wooden doors creaked open. Inside, huddled in the pews and along the walls, were the remaining inhabitants of Kleinhausen. Old men with faces like carved wood, women clutching infants, children with hollow eyes. They stared at Isaiah as he entered, and he watched the same sequence of emotions play across their faces: confusion, fear, disbelief, and then something else, something harder to name. Some of them had probably never seen a black person in their lives. Some of them had seen the propaganda posters, the cartoons, the dehumanizing images. And now here he was, standing in their church with a rifle in his hands and the authority of the United States Army behind him. A priest emerged from the shadows near the altar, a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses and a threadbare cassock. He approached Isaiah cautiously, his hands clasped in front of him. "You are the Americans?" he asked in English. We are, thank God." The priest's shoulders sagged. "We have been waiting, hoping. The Wehrmacht told us terrible things, but we prayed you would come." Isaiah studied the man's face, looking for deception, for hidden hostility. But all he saw was exhaustion and relief. "We need to clear the rest of the town," he said. "Make sure there are no holdouts, no booby traps. Then we'll bring in the rest of the division." "Of course," the priest said. He glanced at the civilians huddled behind him, then back at Isaiah. "May I ask, forgive me, but I must start, you truly an officer?" "A captain?" Isaiah felt Monroe stiffen behind him. Hivers looked at the floor. Davies was staring at the priest with open hostility. Isaiah kept his voice level. "Why do you ask, Father?" The priest seemed to realize his mistake. Color rose in his cheeks. "I only mean that," as we were told. He stopped, gathered himself. Forgive me the propaganda. I see now it was lies. All of it. Yes, Isaiah said quietly. All of it. But even as he said it, he could feel the weight of their gazes. The way they looked at him like he was an equation that didn't add up, a contradiction they couldn't reconcile. He was an officer, a leader, a man with authority over life and death. And he was black. In their world, shaped by the poison of Nazi ideology and centuries of European colonialism, those two facts should have been mutually exclusive. The fact that they weren't was breaking something in their minds, and he could see the fracture spreading across their faces. They spent the next hour sweeping the town. Davies and Monroe checked the buildings on the north side while Isaiah and Havers took the south. They found nothing. No soldiers, no weapons caches, no signs of resistance. Just empty houses and scattered possessions and the ordinary detritus of lives interrupted by war. In one house, Isaiah found a framed photograph on the mantelpiece, a German soldier in Wehrmacht uniform, smiling, standing next to a blonde woman and two children. The glass was cracked. He wondered if the soldier was dead, if the woman was among the refugees in the church, if the children would grow up without a father and spend the rest of their lives trying to understand what it had all been for. They regrouped in the town square as the light began to fail, the snow still falling in thick curtains that reduced visibility to maybe 50 yards. Havers was stamping his feet, trying to keep warm. Monroe was quiet, his jaw tight. Davies looked like he wanted to say something but didn't know how. "We should head back," Havers said. "Report to the colonel. Get the main force up here before dark." Isaiah nodded. But before he could give the order, Monroe grabbed his arm. "Sir, movement, east side." Isaiah turned. Through the snow he could see a figure approaching, walking down the main road with slow, deliberate steps. A man in a German uniform, an officer by the look of him, his hands raised above his head. No weapon, no helmet, just walking toward them like a man with nothing left to lose. "Hold your fire," Isaiah said. He raised his own rifle, sighting down the barrel, his finger on the trigger. "Stop right there." The German stopped. He was maybe 40 feet away, close enough that Isaiah could see his face. Sharp cheekbones, pale skin, eyes like chips of ice. He wore the rank insignia of a captain, a Hauptmann. His uniform was filthy, torn at the shoulder, but he stood straight, his posture military despite the surrender. "I am Hauptmann Erich Mahler," the German called out in accented but clear English. "I wish to surrender myself and my men to you." "What men?" Isaiah called back. 23 soldiers, mostly wounded. "We were cut off from our unit 3 days ago. We have been hiding in the forest to the east. We have no more ammunition, no more food. We are finished." Isaiah glanced at Havers, who looked skeptical. "Could be a ruse," Havers murmured. "Could be," Isaiah agreed. But something in the German's posture, in the flatness of his voice, suggested otherwise. This was not a man planning an ambush. This was a man who had decided the war was over, at least for him. "Tell your men to come out," Isaiah called. "Slowly. No weapons." Mahler turned and gestured toward the tree line. After a moment, figures began to emerge from the snow-shrouded forest. They came in ones and twos, stumbling, limping, some supporting others. They were a ragged group, their uniforms as dirty as their captains, their faces gaunt with hunger and exhaustion. Several had bandages stained dark with old blood. One was missing an arm. Another had his head wrapped in gauze that had once been white. They assembled in the road behind Mahler, a pitiful remnant of what had once been a fighting force. Monroe moved to frisk them to check for hidden weapons, while Davies kept his rifle trained on the group. Havers radioed back to the main force, his voice crackling through the static. Mahler walked forward until he was standing directly in front of Isaiah. Up close, he looked older than 40, his face lined with exhaustion and something else, defeat maybe, or despair. He looked at Isaiah for a long moment, his expression unreadable. "You are the American officer?" he asked quietly. "Captain Isaiah Blackwell." Mahler's eyes narrowed slightly, and Isaiah braced himself for what was coming. He'd seen that look before, the moment of recognition, the recalibration, the question that always followed. Mahler glanced at Isaiah's collar insignia, then back at his face. "I see," Mahler said slowly. And then, to Isaiah's surprise, he came to attention and saluted. Isaiah returned the salute, mechanical, proper, but inside he felt the dissonance of it, the absurdity. Here was a German officer, a man who had fought for the Third Reich, saluting a black American captain with the same formality he would show any other officer. It was a gesture of respect, but it was also something else, a kind of cognitive surrender, an acknowledgement that the world he had known, the hierarchy of race and nation that had structured his understanding of reality, was dissolving. "My men need medical attention," Mahler said. "And food." We have not eaten in 2 days. We'll get you back to our lines, Isaiah said. You'll be processed as prisoners of war. Yes. Malher looked back at his men, at their hollow faces and broken bodies. It is better this way. Better to surrender to you than to the Russians. Isaiah didn't respond to that. He'd heard the stories about what was happening on the Eastern Front, about the brutality of the Soviet advance, about the revenge being exacted for 4 years of Nazi atrocities. He couldn't bring himself to feel sympathy for Malher or his men, but he also couldn't deny the basic humanity of their suffering. Why did you come here? Isaiah asked. To this town specifically? Malher was silent for a moment. We heard there were civilians. We thought perhaps we could hide among them, pretend to be refugees. But when we saw the American flag, all goes. He shrugged. I'm tired of running. Tired of this war. My brother was killed at Stalingrad. My cousin died in Normandy. My father burned to death in Hamburg when your bombers came. What is left to fight for? You tell me, Isaiah said quietly. Malher met his eyes. Nothing. There's nothing left. They marched the German prisoners back toward the American lines as darkness fell, the column moving slowly through the snow. Isaiah took point again, with Havers beside him and Monroe and Davies guarding the prisoners. The Germans walked in silence, their heads down, their spirits broken. Behind them, Kleinhausen disappeared into the night, a ghost town waiting for whatever came next. As they walked, Isaiah found himself thinking about the priest's question, about the way the German civilians had looked at him, about Mahler's salute. He thought about the propaganda posters he'd seen, about the lies that had been told on both sides of the Atlantic, about the complex machinery of hatred and dehumanization that had made this war possible. And he thought about what it meant to be the first, to be the one who shattered assumptions simply by existing, by surviving, by wearing the uniform and carrying the authority and refusing to disappear. The snow kept falling. His feet were numb inside his boots. The weight of his rifle dug into his shoulder. Behind him, one of the German prisoners stumbled and fell, and Monroe helped him up without a word, without hesitation, as if compassion were the most natural thing in the world, even when extended to an enemy. When they reached the American lines an hour later, a cluster of officers was waiting, drawn by Havers' radio call. Colonel Whitmore stood at the center, a tall man with a tobacco-stained mustache and eyes like polished stones. He looked at Isaiah, then at the prisoners, then back at Isaiah. Report, Captain. Isaiah kept his voice crisp, professional. Kleinhausen is secure, sir. Approximately 40 civilians sheltering in the church. No resistance. These 23 German soldiers surrendered in the field. Their commanding officer is Hauptmann Mahler. They're requesting medical attention and food. Whitmore grunted. Good work. He said it like the words tasted bad in his mouth, but he said it. Get those prisoners to the stockade. And Blackwell, he paused, and something complicated moved across his face. You did well. First officer across into Nazi Germany. That'll go in the report. Yes, sir. Dismissed. Isaiah saluted and turned away, feeling the weight of Whitmore's gaze on his back. As he walked toward the command tent, he passed a group of white soldiers warming their hands over a barrel fire. One of them, a sergeant from Tennessee, looked up as Isaiah passed. Heard you took some prisoners, Captain, the sergeant said. His tone was neutral, carefully so. That's right. What did the Krauts say when they saw you? Another soldier, grinning, expecting a joke. Isaiah stopped. He looked at them, these men who had been raised in the same country as him but might as well have come from a different planet, who had grown up with different schools and different churches and different water fountains, who had been told all their lives that people who looked like him were inferior, dangerous, less than. And he thought about Mahler's salute, about the priest's confusion, about the fear in the German civilians' eyes that had slowly, grudgingly transformed into something else. They surrendered, Isaiah said quietly, same as they would have to any other American officer. The grin faded from the soldier's face. No one said anything. Isaiah walked on. That night, lying in his tent with the snow hissing against the canvas and the distant rumble of artillery like a giant's heartbeat, Isaiah tried to sleep but couldn't. His mind kept returning to Kleinhausen, to the faces of the people in the church, to the way they had looked at him like he was a puzzle they couldn't solve. He thought about Mahler, about what the German captain had said. What is left to fight for? And he thought about his own answer, the one he hadn't spoken aloud. He was fighting for the right to be first. First across the Rhine, first into Germany. First to be seen not as a color or a category, but as a man, an officer, a human being with the same capacity for courage and leadership as anyone else. He was fighting to prove something that shouldn't have needed proving. to shatter assumptions that shouldn't have existed in the first place. And the exhaustion of it, the weight of carrying that burden on top of all the other burdens of war was crushing, but he would carry it. Because someone had to. Because if he didn't, then the lies would, not just the Nazi lies about racial hierarchy, but the American lies too, the ones whispered in mess halls and training camps and officers' clubs, the ones that said a black man couldn't lead, couldn't command respect, couldn't be anything more than a laborer or a servant or a footnote. Outside, the snow continued to fall on German soil, covering the ruins and the bodies and the burned-out tanks, covering everything in white as if the earth itself were trying to forget. But Isaiah knew that some things couldn't be buried, couldn't be erased. He had been first. He had crossed over. And whatever came next, whether it was more combat or survival or the long, grinding work of building peace from the ashes, he would face it with the same quiet determination that had carried him this far. In the morning, when the snow stopped and the sun broke through the clouds for the first time in days, Isaiah emerged from his tent to find Corporal Davies waiting for him. The young soldier looked nervous, his hands shoved deep in his pockets. "Sir, I just wanted to say," Davies started again. "Yesterday with those prisoners and the civilians and all, you handled it real well. Better than most officers I've served under, colored or white." Isaiah studied the corporal's face, looking for irony or mockery, but found only sincerity. "Thank you, Davies. And sir, I'm from Ohio, and back home we got some ideas about how things should be, but..." He swallowed hard. "Anyway, I just wanted you to know I'm glad you're leading us. That's all. That's all." Before Isaiah could respond, Davies saluted, sharp, correct, unforced, and walked away. And standing there in the cold German morning with the sun on his face and the war still raging all around him, Isaiah Blackwell felt something shift inside his chest. Not hope exactly, not vindication, but something like recognition, that the work he was doing, the burden he was carrying, was not invisible. That somewhere slowly minds were changing. That being first meant more than just being a target or a symbol. It meant opening a door that others could walk through. He thought about the generations that would come after him, about the black officers who would one day command battalions and divisions and armies, without anyone questioning whether they belonged. He thought about his mother in Birmingham, about whether she would understand that he had fought not just against the Nazis, but against something older and more insidious, something that lived in the hearts of his own countrymen. He thought about Mahler's question, "What is left to fight for?" and realized that his answer was both simpler and more complicated than anything the German captain could have imagined. He was fighting for the future, for the possibility that one day being first wouldn't be necessary anymore,